Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the podcast. And today I'm going to give my review of AEW's Dynamite. Before I even get started with the show, man, what an absolute crazy night last night for Dynamite. Big business, and for what it's worth, in my opinion, AEW and Tony Khan absolutely delivered on the big business for Dynamite last night. Let's get into the show, man. Starting off with a bang, we get the debut of none other than Mercedes Moné. She is now all elite. Mercedes comes down to the ring, crowds chanting CEO, CEO. You can tell Mercedes was emotional, especially being that she was in her hometown last night in Boston, Massachusetts, at the TD Garden. Mercedes says that she's home. She also thanks the fans and says that if it wasn't for the fans, she wouldn't be here, and thanks the fans for being with her throughout this entire process of her being away from WWE. And being away from wrestling for a little while. She also mentions Eddie Guerrero and how much Eddie Guerrero meant to her as a fan growing up in professional wrestling. Mercedes also talks about her milestones, the great career that she's had over in WWE. Obviously, she didn't mention WWE, but the milestones that she's had in her career, whether it was main eventing pay-per-views to winning championships and pretty much being the leader of the Women's Evolution. So, again, she was talking about her milestones. Mercedes also mentions that she wanted to be in AEW. She also mentions Willow and says that there's unfinished business with Willow. If you guys remember, the reason why we haven't seen Mercedes Moné for quite a while as far as being in the ring was that the match that she had with Willow, Mercedes sustained an ankle injury and she was out for 6 to 8 months with that injury. After that, on the Titantron, it was shown that Mercedes is now all elite. So, again, this was huge, man. I mean, if I really had to look into all this stuff with Mercedes and really dissect it, it was heavily speculated for a while that Mercedes was going to be going over to AEW. I mean, I remember since I believe it was January that, I mentioned even in one of my shows that it's a very strong possibility that AEW was going to sign Mercedes Moné. I think what solidified it for me was the fact of this show last night. Even though we didn't get an announcement from Tony Khan that it was going to be exactly Mercedes Moné, if you guys look at the graphic of how they said Boston, it was the BOSS $. Obviously, Sasha Banks is from Boston, Massachusetts. And the fact that AEW had big business event at the TD Garden in Boston, it just had everything pretty much telling me that it was going to be Mercedes. Now, I know a lot of people weren't really happy, and for the fact that Mercedes ended up showing up in AEW and not WWE. I mean, to be honest with y'all, man, for one, and I've said this multiple times, and I'm going to reiterate this one last time, I don't understand the tribalism, to be honest with you. To me, we have an alternative. We don't just have WWE, and I'm not knocking what WWE is doing because I've told you guys for the past few weeks, past few months, the storyline right now with Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns and this entire Bloodline storyline is fantastic. And I'm very much excited for WrestleMania this year. It's going to be insane. It's going to be absolutely insane. Now you have Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson involved in this as well. Might be a tag match night one between Cody and Seth teaming up against Rock and Roman. And then obviously on Sunday we might get Reigns versus Rhodes for the Universal Championship. So it's kind of hard not to be excited for what is going on in WWE. But with that being said, the tribalism, the shit needs to stop, man. I mean, at the end of the day, we're fans of professional wrestling. And I know there's a boatload of fans that are pissed off that Mercedes did not show up or Sasha Banks did not show up in WWE. It doesn't mean it's never going to happen. I think people need to reiterate that. And people love to shit on Tony Khan, but at the end of the day, you got to look at the facts here, man. And the biggest person I could say for as far as how this panned out for Tony Khan and wrestling fans was CM Punk. Now, I told you guys before when it pertained to Phil Brooks that, with all the drama and speculation that was going on backstage, when he returned after the all-out media scrum, the all-out brawl with the Young Bucks, was the juice worth the squeeze bringing Punk back and bringing him back into the fold and being a part of the roster again. Well, obviously, I was right, and it didn't pay off for CM Punk, and eventually he was, booted from AEW and fired. But at the same time, if it wasn't for Tony Khan, where would we be seeing CM Punk right now? Would CM Punk even come back to wrestling to this point? So you got to give credit where credit's due and respect where respect is due. So for the people that are, WWE elitist, and pissed off possibly that Mercedes is an AEW, stop. There's no point of being pissed off about it. to be honest. I mean, at the end of the day, we are wrestling fans. That's why we're here. That's why I'm here. That's why I present my show to you guys every single week, to give you guys a full rundown and full review of what happened on Dynamite and my thoughts about the show. To me, Mercedes showing up in AEW fits perfectly for an abundance of reason. If you guys look at and I mentioned this multiple times as well, if you guys look at the women's roster right now, it's loaded. The women's roster is stacked. If you get a returning Jamie Hayter, Britt Baker comes back, Serena Deeb just came back from a lengthy injury, Thunder Rosa just came back from a lengthy injury, you got Julia Hart, you got Sky Blue, Willow Nightingale, Statlander, Toni Storm, Deonna Purrazzo, Red Velvet. These are just a few names on the women's roster right now for AEW. Then you bring in Mercedes Moné and what she can bring to the table. I mean, she completely revolutionized the women's division over in WWE, the women's revolution. She can do the same thing here with AEW. And if I was Tony Khan, I would give her the keys to the kingdom, meaning the women's locker room, and create storylines and create build and put more spotlight into this women's division. And I think that's exactly what Mercedes is going to do. Even in the comments that she made last night, that she's very excited to work with some of the women that are currently on the roster. And as fans, just from my opinion alone, I already knew that Mercedes was going to be showing up in AEW. I was 95% sure she was going to show up. But my thing after that was, okay, who was going to be the first challenger to Mercedes? And again, nobody truly knows who that's going to be. But at the end of the day, it's excitement. It's an alternative. And for what it's worth, ever since Revolution, man, Tony Khan and AEW have been firing on all cylinders. And what I mean by that is obviously bringing in Ospreay, bringing in Okada, bringing in Mercedes, and then continuing storylines from previous Dynamites, even Collision for that matter. So again, they're starting to incorporate Collision and Dynamite, and hopefully even stuff on Collision gets incorporated into possible pay-per-views for the foreseeable future in AEW, which is very exciting. But as far as Mercedes Moné is concerned, I'm very excited. I think it's a great addition to the roster for AEW. I know some people were like, oh, well, she might not, with Mercedes showing up on AEW, they might not even reach, 1 million views and ratings or whatever. Who gives a shit, man? Honestly. If you're that much fixated on the ratings for pro wrestling, you don't need to be a wrestling fan, to be honest with you. And I'm just keeping it a stack with you guys, man. I mean, if you guys are that fixated on the ratings for between AEW and WWE, you shouldn't be watching wrestling, to be honest. Who gives a shit about the ratings? I don't. And this ain't 1995. This ain't WWE versus WCW. No one gives a shit about the ratings. And honestly, my thing is, and I told you guys before, competition breeds success. And that's exactly what we're getting. There is competition between WWE and AEW. But doesn't mean there has to be tribalism. This is best for both companies. For both. Because now it's to a point where, you got Mercedes over in AEW. She's finally back. I want to tune in on Wednesday to see what she says next. Or tune in to Collision on Saturday. You got WWE with the Bloodline and Cody Rhodes and that storyline and Dwayne The Rock Johnson. What's going to happen next with Cody or The Rock? It gets people invested in the product, man. And I think people need to stop worrying about these damn ratings and actually open your eyes and realize what you're watching on television weekly. Whether it be Raw, SmackDown, or Dynamite or Collision. Enjoy it, man. I mean, at the end of the day, these men and women are not going to be around forever. They're not. Eventually, they're going to retire and move on to greater pastures and do something else. Enjoy it. Sit back, relax, enjoy, and watch the ride, man. Right now, Mercedes coming into AEW, a lot of questions are going to be answered. What is Tony Khan going to do with Mercedes Moné? Is Mercedes going to take over the women's division and create a new revolution for the women in AEW? Could she do it again after what she did with WWE? Anything is possible right now, and I think people just need to relax, quit the tribalism shit, and just enjoy what we're getting with both companies. To be honest with you, I'm definitely excited for what Mercedes Moné has to bring to the table. And her first match. Will she have a match on Dynasty? Which is AEW's next pay-per-view in April. I believe it's April 21st in St. Louis, Missouri. Who knows? Will it be Willow Nightingale? Will it be Julia Hart? Who knows? Will it be Serena Deeb that challenges Mercedes Moné? Who knows? But all I will say in full confidence that I'm excited to see Mercedes Moné in AEW. I think it gets a lot more spotlight and a lot more eyes on the AEW product, which is great. And it's excitement, man. It's a great thing to see. So again, it's going to be one hell of a ride for AEW this summer, man. I'm definitely excited to see that. Moving on from that, we go into our first official match of the night. It is Samoa Joe defending the AEW World Championship against Wardlow. I thought it was a good match. Back and forth matchup between Wardlow and Samoa Joe, with Wardlow keeping the pace of the match. Joe then hits an enziguri on Wardlow in the corner. Wardlow then gets to the top rope, hits a whisper in the wind off the top rope on Samoa Joe. Joe then gets up, hits a power slam on Wardlow, and then Joe applies a submission hold on Wardlow. Wardlow taps out, and your winner of the match and still AEW World Champion is Samoa Joe. After the match, Swerve comes down to the ring. He's being stopped by security. He ends up attacking the security. Makes his way down to the ring, has a stare down with Joe. Joe leaves the ring and walks back up the ramp. So it looks like there's some unfinished business here between Swerve and Samoa Joe. A couple of things I want to say about this, man. This might be a hot topic for most people, but I think the all-in-all stock, overall stock for Wardlow is severely low. I mean, you go from, what was it, last week or 2 weeks ago for Wardlow cutting that great promo and finally saying that he was pissed off and that he wanted an opportunity and be a main eventer and wanted to be in a main event spot. Then we get to this match, and Wardlow loses clean to Joe. No disqualification, nothing. He loses clean. I told you guys this a while back ago, and I named a couple guys and men and women that I think are going to go and leave AEW. I think Wardlow is still on the hot seat to leave AEW. I truly believe Tony Khan and AEW have no idea what else to do with Wardlow at this point. I mean, now credit, you could look at it both ways here. Do you want Joe to lose the belt to Wardlow? Yeah and no. Right now with what Joe is doing with the AEW World title, man, he's making it relevant. He's making it predominantly known. He's putting, stock into the AEW World Championship, and all the promos that he has cut and the matches that he's had so far have been absolutely incredible. So Joe's been a phenomenal champion for AEW. But on the flip side of that coin, you have to look at Wardlow and the situation that he is in. He's also in a storyline within his own stable with Adam Cole. This whole thing with Adam Cole and Wardlow was that Wardlow was going to win the AEW World Championship and then vacate that belt and hand it over to Adam Cole. That didn't happen last night. And Wardlow did not beat Samoa Joe. So to me, I think at this point, unfortunately, with Wardlow, and it's a shame that I feel like the stock with Wardlow is an all-time low. And there's another wrestler for AEW, too, that might be a hot topic in discussion here in a little bit. But I think his stock is going down in AEW, too. And I think AEW is also running out of options for this superstar to have anything more to do with AEW, which I will get to here soon. But when this pertains to Wardlow, I mean, to me, I think he's on the hot seat to go over to WWE. I do. I think he's on the list. I think Ricky Starks is on that list. And I also think Malachi Black is on that list as well. AEW, I say they dropped the ball with Wardlow a little bit. And I mentioned this multiple times about Wardlow as well. I remember the storyline that Wardlow had with MJF. It was one of the best storylines going at the time in AEW. Everybody was invested, and everybody had Wardlow's back because MJF was such a heel. And everybody hated MJF at the time, and they were waiting for Wardlow to get away from MJF and kind of become his own man in AEW. And finally, when Wardlow had that match with MJF and beat MJF, Wardlow was able to go on and do his own thing. But I do remember distinctly the first match that he had after that great storyline with MJF was a match against JD Drake. And I was like, wow, you go from this great storyline to, okay, I'm going to have a match with JD Drake. When JD Drake wasn't doing anything, he wasn't in any storylines. He was just basically almost an enhancement talent at the time for AEW, in my opinion. So to me, I feel like Wardlow's time in AEW, it's run its course, to be honest with you. I don't think there's anything else for me personally where I'm going to be fully invested on what Wardlow's going to be doing for the foreseeable future in AEW. There's nothing else more for this guy to do. They have no plans for him. You go from having a match with MJF and that storyline and being part of Pinnacle to, moving on and going after the TNT Championship and becoming TNT Champion and then losing the belt like a week or two later. And then you're a part of this new stable with Adam Cole and Roderick Strong and Taven and Bennett with Undisputed Kingdom. And I feel like you dropped the ball. They dropped the ball last night. At this point, how many people are going to be truly invested on what happens with Wardlow next? I'm not. I think Wardlow's had his opportunity, and it's past him, man. I do think that Wardlow is going to be one of those people that are also going to go over from AEW to WWE. I can totally see that happening here in the foreseeable future. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a six-man tag team matchup. It is the Young Bucks and Okada versus Penta, Pac, and Eddie Kingston. I thought it was a good match, man. Back and forth matchup between both teams with Penta, Pac, and Eddie Kingston keeping the pace of the match. Kingston and Okada both exchange devastating chops in the middle of the ring. Okada hits a drop kick. Kingston then hits an exploder suplex on Matt Jackson. Okada then hits a devastating DDT in the middle of the ring. Nick Jackson then hits a low blow on Eddie, which allows Okada to hit a Rainmaker on Kingston. Pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are the Young Bucks and Okada. After the match, Okada stares down Eddie Kingston, with Kingston staring up at the lights and Okada holding up the Continental Championship. Now, the interesting thing with this is that obviously Okada has his sights set on Eddie Kingston and that Continental Championship, and it was announced last night that I believe it's next week Eddie Kingston will be defending the Continental Championship against Okada. So it's definitely going to be a great match to watch. And again, I know a lot of people might not be happy with Okada being a heel. I'm all for it. I think it was a great way to bring in Okada, a whole new look for Okada. And I'm definitely interested in this match between Okada and Kingston for the Continental Championship next week. It's going to be an absolute crazy match. Moving on from that, we have Tony Schiavone interviewing Will Ospreay. Ospreay and Tony Schiavone announced that at Dynasty, it will be Ospreay versus Bryan Danielson, which is an absolute dream match. I'm definitely excited to see that. Ospreay hypes up Danielson, says he has a lot of respect for Danielson and what he's done on the Indies. He also hypes up the match at Dynasty, and he says that he wants to bring the life back to AEW as well. A couple of things I'm going to say about Ospreay here, man. Since he's been with AEW, officially, Ospreay's had some great matches. The match he had with Takeshita, phenomenal. And honestly, like I told you guys, probably candidate for match of the year. Fantastic match. And then he had the match on Dynamite against Kyle Fletcher, which, again, was a fantastic matchup. I told you all before, man. I think, with AEW, Will Ospreay is definitely going to be a player in AEW. The guy is probably one of the best wrestlers in the world, if not the best wrestler in the world right now. Having this matchup with Bryan Danielson, man, is going to be an absolute classic, possible 5-star match. Which will compete with the match that Ospreay had with Takeshita. I think this match is going to be absolutely incredible. And I think a lot of people need to realize this too, that Danielson, he's pretty much almost on his, not full retirement tour, but retirement tour. He's crossing off matches that he personally wants before his career as a full-time competitor comes to an end. And he's trying to cross all his T's and dot his I's to have these memorable matches, not only for himself, but for the fans. And I think, Danielson and Ospreay is going to be one of those incredible matches that everybody's going to be, tuned into. That's going to be absolutely incredible, man. And I think it's going to be one of those matches that are going to be, it's going to pretty much set the pace for what Dynamite has to offer for the remainder of the year, to be honest with you. So I'm definitely excited for that. I'm definitely excited for Dynasty as well, man. And this match is going to be absolutely insane between Ospreay and Danielson. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Jay White versus Darby Allin. I thought this was a good match, man. Back and forth matchup between Jay White and Darby Allin, with Darby keeping the pace of the match. Jay White then throws Darby into a chair. Darby then hits a stunner on Jay White in the middle of the ring. Darby then hits a Scorpion Death Drop on Jay White. Darby then hits a coffin drop, but lands on the apron, missed Jay White. White then capitalizes on this by hitting a Blade Runner on Darby, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Jay White. After the match, the Guns end up attacking Darby. The Acclaim come down to the ring. They help Darby Allin. Billy Gunn gets in Jay White's face, tells him to knock the stuff, not to be attacking Darby Allin, and this is not the way to do business. Jay White then gets mad, attacks Billy Gunn with a chair shot. Guns then attack the Acclaimed, and then Jay White takes a chair to injure Darby Allin's leg. A couple of things I want to say about this, man. Number one, I was kind of shocked, but not completely surprised that, we were going to get a split up here between the Bullet Club Gold and the Acclaimed. For what it's worth, I think both stables are great. I really do. The Acclaimed are awesome in what they've been doing, as well as Bullet Club Gold, but there needed to be that separation. I just feel like the stable was, too big, and it wasn't going to work. Because at the end of the day, both teams were holding championship titles. They weren't really defending those belts. And two, Jay White has to get back to having a singles run. And he hasn't really had a singles run or a predominant match since the match he had with MJF. And where he was the number one contender for the belt. Jay White has to get back on the main event scene. in my honest opinion. Jay White does not need to be doing tag team matches constantly and everything else like that. He needs to leave that to the Gun Club, in my honest opinion. And Jay White goes on a singles run, whether it's going after the TNT Championship, International Championship, or the AEW World Championship. That's where Jay White needs to be. Jay White's a main eventer. Absolutely. Especially with this tag team tournament that's coming down the pike here soon. Obviously, I put the Gun Club in that and have them focus on the AEW Tag Team Championships, which would be perfect. And if I was Tony Khan, making this tag team tournament, I would make it exactly like the Continental Classic and put the best of the best teams that you have in this tournament and as a round robin. Absolutely. Which that will give the Gun Club something to do. Jay White, like I said, needs to go on a singles run and put him more in a predominant role in AEW, and he deserves to be in the main event scene, in my honest opinion. For the Acclaimed, to be honest with you, I mean, the Acclaimed out of both these stables, as far as tag team wrestling, I mean, the Acclaimed are perfect to fit in the tag team division. Even with Billy Gunn. I mean, Billy Gunn is not going to wrestle every single week for the foreseeable future. It's not going to happen. Even though he is the current AEW six-man tag team champions. That's great. Or trios champions. But he doesn't need to wrestle every week. Max Caster and Anthony Bowens, they are a tag team, the Acclaimed. Obviously, like I mentioned earlier with Bullet Club Gold and the Gun Club, I put the Acclaimed in the conversation for the tag team tournament and make it the best tag team tournament that you can possibly put together. And that gives them something to do. I just feel like, with everything being said, it wasn't going to work, man. They had no vision for this stable. And it was always going in two different directions. Everything was getting mixed up. It just wasn't working out for both the Acclaimed and Bullet Club Gold. Not only that, we're eventually going to get the return of Juice Robinson. I know a lot of people are anticipating Juice's return, myself included. And I think it works for Bullet Club Gold. Obviously, Jay White, Austin and Colton Gunn, and then as well as Juice Robinson all being Bullet Club Gold. It just works. As well as with the Acclaimed. You got Max, you got Bowens, you got Billy Gunn. It just works, man. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think that's the perfect analogy that I have for this. If it's not broke, don't fix it. It was perfect what the Acclaimed originally had, as well as Bullet Club Gold. And I'm happy that, this super staple, if you will, is coming to an end. And the Acclaimed can do their own thing, as well as Bullet Club Gold. But again, like I said, Jay White needs to be in the conversation for a singles run and being a main eventer. The other thing I want to talk about quickly is Darby Allin. I was not surprised what Jay White did to Darby Allin towards the end of this match, due to the fact that it was last week Darby Allin announced that he was going to be taking some time off and wanting to climb Mount Everest. Darby Allin's probably going to be off the scene as far as wrestling in AEW is concerned for the next 3-4 months. And honestly, for what it's worth, there is some concerns with that. I mean, my thing is, obviously, hats off to Darby Allin for wanting to, do this. A lot of respect for Darby wanting to, climb Mount Everest. But I will say, as far as what's been going on with Darby and AEW, I mean, he just had that great retirement match with Sting. Darby's, a hot topic right now in AEW. And, we had this match with Jay White, and, obviously, Jay White injured his legs, pretty much writing him off TV. I just think it was, in a way, too soon for Darby to leave. I think Darby, everybody was anticipating what was going to happen with Darby next now that Sting is gone. Throughout majority of Darby's career in AEW, he's been teaming up with Sting. So now that Sting is retired and no longer in AEW, what's going to happen next with Darby? And now that Darby's going to climb Mount Everest, I mean, Darby's going to be gone for the next 3-4 months. So again, all that potential that we had from that great storyline with Sting and the great match that he just had with, Sting's retirement match, Darby's going to be taking some time off. So, who knows what's going to happen next with Darby? Again, I have a lot of respect for Darby. I think him climbing Mount Everest is absolutely awesome. But he's going to be off the scene with AEW for the next 3-4 months. So, again, who knows, man. But hats off to Jay White for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Gates of Agony versus Hook and Chris Jericho. I thought it was a decent match. Back and forth matchup between the Gates of Agony and Hook and Jericho. Hook and Jericho were keeping the pace of the match with Jericho hitting a lion salt in the middle of the ring. Hook then hits a T-bone suplex. Jericho hits a springboard dropkick. And then Hook applies a red rum. And your winners of the match are Hook and Chris Jericho. couple of things I want to talk about with this match, man. Number one, after the match, it was announced that I believe it's next week. It will be Hook versus Chris Jericho, one-on-one, I believe next week. Not a bad match. But I do have some issues with this, and I mentioned this earlier in the show about another wrestler that I feel like AEW has come full circle with as far as booking is concerned. And that, unfortunately, is Chris Jericho. I think Chris Jericho, as of late, I feel like AEW is also running out of options. And I have all respect in the world for Jericho. I think Jericho is a great wrestler. He constantly and continuously always reinvents himself every time. It goes from the Painmaker to Chris Jericho to, the Lionheart. Jericho is one of those guys that can always, make himself known in the wrestling world no matter where he's at or where he's going. That's Jericho's MO. But as far as of late, I feel like AEW, creatively wise, have no plans for Jericho. To be honest with you, yes, I understand they booked a match with Hook and Jericho. I don't understand why they teamed Hook and Jericho together. I guess it's something because Jericho has no other option. But I also feel like the creative with AEW has kind of run its course with Jericho. Jericho has been predominantly shown in AEW. He's been in great storylines, whether it was MJF, the Inner Circle, the JAS. Jericho has produced a lot of good stuff for AEW. A lot of great storylines, a lot of great moments. I just feel like, AEW at this point, currently with Jericho, they have no real plans for Jericho. And I'm not saying that I think Jericho is on the hot seat to go to WWE. I'm not saying that. I think Jericho is going to be with AEW for a long time. But as far as creative-wise, I feel like they have nothing planned for Jericho at this moment, creatively-wise. The match with Hook, it's a solid match. But I will say this, when it pertains to Hook, Hook's done a fantastic job. It looks like Tony Khan's put a lot of spotlight back on Hook. But the FTW championship means nothing. It doesn't mean a damn thing for AEW. So, again, it's a cool match between Hook and Jericho, but I feel like AEW as a whole right now, creatively, have no real strong plans for Jericho moving forward as of right now. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Willow versus Rio. I thought it was a good match. Back and forth matchup between Willow and Rio, with Willow keeping the pace of the match. Rio then hits a foot stomp off the apron on Willow. Willow then hits a dragon suplex off the apron on Willow as well. Willow gets up, hits a devastating powerbomb on Rio, pins her for the 3, and your winner of the match is Willow Nightingale. After the match, the lights go out, and then Julia Hart is shown on the ramp. Sky Blue then attacks Willow from behind. Mercedes then gets involved. She comes down to the ring. She attacks Julia Hart, and then Willow picks up Mercedes Monet's arm to celebrate Willow's win and the fact that Mercedes came out to save Willow. A couple things I want to say about this, man. Number one, and I mentioned this earlier, who is going to be the first challenger for Mercedes Moné? Will it be Willow Nightingale? Or will it be Julia Hart? To be honest with you, man, I don't, Mercedes needs to get a win under her belt before I think Mercedes needs to go after a championship in AEW. I think that's fair. And plus, she's been out of the ring for a little while. So, to see Mercedes come back, I wouldn't give her an instant title shot. I wouldn't. Now, do I think that she'll probably challenge Willow again? Sure. That story writes itself. The last time her and Willow got in the ring, being Mercedes and Willow, Mercedes sustained an injury. She was out for 6 to 8 months. So, obviously, there's some unfinished business there between Mercedes and Willow Nightingale. So, I'm all for that. The only thing that I was kind of speculating about was that I felt like Willow was in a storyline with Chris Statlander and Stokely Hathaway. So, I don't know if they opted not to do with that storyline and said, okay, well, we're going to have Willow versus Mercedes, possibly at Dynasty. Which, again, I'm all for it. I think Willow has a lot of potential. She has a very high ceiling in AEW, and sky's the limit for Willow. But I won't be surprised if it's Willow versus Mercedes. I wouldn't. But there's a lot of matches on the table for Mercedes. A lot. The other biggest match, and I don't think a lot of people are talking about, is Mercedes versus Saraya. And the reason why I said this is a big match is because, from what I understand, Paige, if you will, had wrestled Mercedes, and Mercedes ended up injuring Paige, and she was pretty much done with wrestling almost for the foreseeable future. That was it. So to see Saraya come back to wrestling and be in AEW, then you have Mercedes also now a part of AEW, that can also be a dream match between both Mercedes and Saraya. And then you obviously have Britt Baker. Britt Baker mentioned on Twitter that she wants to come back in AEW. She misses it. She wants to come back to AEW and cut some promos and be back in the AEW ring. Again, Baker versus Monet would be incredible. Now, honestly, I would probably book that match for All In between Baker and Mercedes Moné because it sells itself. You got Jamie Hayter. Hopefully she returns back from injury. I think she's been out now for 10 months, so hopefully she returns to AEW here relatively soon. She's definitely been missed. But there's a lot of talent in that women's locker room right now who have great matches with Mercedes. Serena Deeb, Thunder Rosa, Statlander, Sheeta, Rio. There's just a lot of talent. There's an abundance of talent on that roster. So, again, it's great to see Mercedes in AEW. I know, like I said earlier in the podcast, I know some people might be pissed off that she's with AEW, but like I told you guys, man, you guys got to enjoy it. Just enjoy it. And if you guys have been watching wrestling as long as I have, just savor the moment, man. Because, I remember, and I told you guys off the rip that I was a humongous WCW fan. I was. Not that I didn't like WWE and what WWF was doing at the time. I was a huge fan. Seeing Bret Hart and WWE and the match he's had with Shawn Michaels, Steve Austin, Owen, the WrestleMania 10 match between Bret and Owen and Yokozuna. All these wrestlers made a humongous impact on me as a fan of wrestling. Well before Bret even went over to WCW and stuff like that, and then obviously Eddie Guerrero. But what I was saying to you is enjoy the moment, man, because you never know what's going to happen. And like I told you guys earlier, these men and women are not going to be around forever. They're eventually going to retire and not want to wrestle anymore and move on to greater pastures. So, just enjoy it. It's an alternative. If you guys were like, you know what, I'm kind of getting done watching Raw and SmackDown, I wish there was an alternative. Well, we have that. Just enjoy it. We haven't seen anything like this. Not saying that you guys don't understand this, but we haven't had anything like this since, I believe it was 1995, when we had, Raw going up against Monday Night Nitro. And everybody at the time was, focused and fixated on, who was going to show up on Raw, who was going to show up on Nitro. And then we get some big players show up on Nitro. Hogan, Randy, Lex, household names that would show up. Rick Rude. Rick Rude, I believe, is the only person that showed up on Raw and Nitro on the same night. So, enjoy it. No one thought that Mercedes was going to possibly leave WWE, but she did. And went to Japan, and then left Japan and went over to AEW. So, it's crazy. And it's a laundry list of names that AEW has brought, talent that's come over to AEW that you never thought that would ever show up in AEW. If we're going back from the beginning, look at Sting. Look at the late, great Brody Lee. And Brody Lee made a humongous impact on AEW. Huge impact with the Dark Order, with Evil Uno and Reynolds and Silver and all those guys. Brody Lee made a humongous impact in AEW when he showed up. It was monumental. And like I said, you had Sting, and then DDP was also a part of AEW there for a short time. Matt Hardy made his debut with AEW, Jeff Hardy as well. Andrade, Malachi Black showing up. All these great names. Keith Lee. All these great names that show up on AEW that you really didn't think, oh man, that they're actually going to show up in AEW. So, as a fan, just enjoy it because, you never know what's going to happen. And I think that's the biggest issue with this tribalism shit between WWE and AEW. Just enjoy it. Now, one, you might think one's better than the other. Okay, fine. You're entitled to your own opinion. But I'm saying to you as a wrestling fan, you can't sit here and honestly tell me that, okay, for prime example, I cover AEW. Not saying I would never cover WWE or SmackDown or Raw. I possibly will. Not saying I won't. But at the same time, you can't say as a wrestling fan that you're not going to be invested in what AEW is doing and you're not going to be invested in what WWE is doing. And I made that relatively known before today's show. I'm completely in tune with what's going on with the Bloodline and Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns and Dwayne The Rock Johnson. I think it's a great storyline. And hopefully, when it comes to WrestleMania 40 in Philly, Cody Rhodes walks out with that Universal Championship and he finishes the damn story. That's what everybody wants to see, is Cody to finish the story. And it's one of the best storylines, one of the greatest storylines ever in WWE, hands down. But then on the flip side of that coin, you have AEW and what they're trying to build over there. And obviously, AEW is playing catch up. WWE's been around for like 50 years. You know what I mean? So AEW is just trying to get their feet wet. They've been around for 5 years. Some things have worked, and some things have been just horrible. And I've said that. But at the same time, too, as a wrestling fan, you can't say that you're not invested in both companies. There's no way. So to me, the tribalism, to me, it's laughable, man. Just enjoy the product that you're getting. Enjoy it. Because to me, I'm enjoying it as a fan every single time I watch it, whether it be Raw, SmackDown, or AEW. Whether it's PLEs for WWE or it's pay-per-view events for AEW. I'm all in, man. I mean, it's great to see. And it's making great moments. And then having Mercedes Moné showing up last night was a great moment. Not only for wrestling fans, but the fans that were in attendance last night at the TD Garden in Boston, where Mercedes' hometown. Her family, her friends were there, I believe. Trinity and Bailey were also in the crowd cheering on Mercedes Moné with her showing up in AEW last night. I mean, it's awesome. It's absolutely awesome. So, I mean, to me, I think this is going to be one of those years for AEW that's going to be insane. I do. And the other thing I want to talk about quickly as well is some small announcements. And it's speculation at this point, but I wanted to talk to you guys about it briefly before I head the hell out of here. Forbidden Door. There's been a lot of speculation, a lot of moving parts as of late with what's going down with Forbidden Door. Now, what I've learned and what I've gathered is that Forbidden Door is going to be insane this year. And what I mean by that is it's not going to just be your standard AEW versus New Japan. No. From what I've gathered and the information that I've got from some of the people that I've talked to, Forbidden Door this year is going to incorporate 4 different promotions. AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling, CMLL, as well as Stardom. Now, if you guys don't know what Stardom is, it's an all-Japanese women's promotion. One of their biggest names over there was Julia, which WWE and AEW has been trying to do their absolute best to recruit Julia, whether it be over to WWE or AEW. She is a household name for Stardom. So at Forbidden Door this year, we're not going to just get our standard New Japan versus AEW. We're getting 4 different promotions in total to be a part of this Forbidden Door show, which is going to be incredible. Now, I don't know how many matches they're going to book for this, considering that they have all these promotions working together under the same roof for this event. But it's going to be historical. I know AEW has been doing a lot of work here as of late with CMLL. We've had some superstars from CMLL showed up on AEW, whether it be Dynamite or Collision. We had Hechicero, Valero Jr., we had Mystico also be a part of AEW as well. Atlantis Jr. had a match recently with Chris Jericho. So AEW and Tony Khan have been doing a lot of work with CMLL, and I think it's been vice versa between both companies. So to have AEW, CMLL, New Japan Pro Wrestling, and Stardom all be a part of Forbidden Door, it's going to be incredible. And the other thing I forgot to mention was when Mercedes came out to the ring to talk about why she's in AEW, she talked about an evolution. She talked about a revolution, and she said that AEW wants to go global. And I think this has a lot to do with Stardom. And the other speculation was that literally last night on Dynamite show, Tony Khan had brought in the main promoter of Stardom currently right now into the show last night, possibly have a discussion, more than likely about maybe joining forces for this Forbidden Door pay-per-view, which I'm all for it. I mean, if it gives an opportunity to bring in more talent and make a better show, I'm all for it. I think Tony Khan, like I told you guys, man, I think AEW this year is going to be one hell of a ride. I mean, even the month of March so far has been incredible with bringing in Okada, now bringing in Mercedes Moné. This summer for AEW is going to be absolutely insane. We got another pay-per-view, a new pay-per-view coming up here in April with Dynasty. I believe it's April 21st live in St. Louis, Missouri. So, AEW is firing all cylinders, man. I'm still hoping and praying for a streaming deal, hopefully sometime this year for AEW. I think they desperately need it, especially if they are going to go to a 12 pay-per-view format this year, or try to. I know Tony kind of mentioned that the goal right now was 8 or 9 pay-per-views, and then obviously the 3 pay-per-views for Ring of Honor, which would completely total their pay-per-view calendar, but who knows? I think Tony Khan, he might possibly just add 12 pay-per-views for AEW and then the 3 for Ring of Honor. Who knows? But hopefully, I'm praying for it that Tony Khan and AEW in some kind of way secure a streaming deal for AEW in the foreseeable future, because I think it'd be great not only for the consumer but for AEW. Hypothetically, if it goes to HBO Max, it gets a lot more eyeballs and more subscribers for HBO Max as well. So, and AEW definitely has the catalog to put on HBO Max as well. So hopefully hopefully that's a conversation that does happen here, hopefully the foreseeable future. But with that being said, man, AEW last night with Big Business, they knocked it out of the park, man. I mean, bringing in Mercedes Moné, possible announcement of them working with Stardom. They didn't make an announcement last night, but it has been speculated that they might make an announcement about them working with Stardom. I'm all for it. I think AEW, as of late, I can tell the change. I know they brought in Jennifer Pepperman, who was a senior writer for the creative team over in WWE. She's come over to AEW, and I think, obviously it's going to help out Mercedes Moné, and she's done some work on the writing team with Mercedes Moné. So to me, I think, once they brought in Peppermint and everything else like that, especially after Revolution, a lot of things are starting to gel together again. The storylines are starting to stick. They're starting to marinate a little bit, get fans invested, and it's bleeding into other Dynamites and possible pay-per-views, which that's all I can ask for as a fan, to get me invested in these storylines and these matches. So I'm absolutely all for it. And like I told you guys earlier, and I'm going to reiterate this one last time, that I'm telling y'all, this summer for AEW is going to be absolutely insane. So hopefully you guys are ready for it. I know I'm ready for it, and I think, like I said, it's going to be a great summer for AEW and wrestling in total, especially with WWE and WrestleMania and what AEW is doing here for the foreseeable future. So I'm all for it, man. I think it's going to be a great year and a great summer for all professional wrestling. So with that being said, this is my review of AEW's Dynamite. I hope you guys are out there staying